Welcome to the Middlesex Moments radio show. I'm Julie Deneen. I'm filling in for Dr. Wasesha as your host here at Middlesex. And today we're starting a new series called Meet the Professors. I've got two of our English professors here at the college today, Christine Ruggiero and Terry McNulty, both in our English department. So I'd like to introduce them to you. Christine, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Tell us a little bit about yourself, how you got started with teaching.
Well, let's see. I was 19 and I thought that I wanted to be a physical therapist. And so I started taking classes in science and soon realized that it was not a very good match for me. And then I started taking classes in general education, just liberal arts and sciences classes. And it was really classes like diversity and power and vice and virtue and self, family, and culture that really sparked an interest in reading and in writing. And one book in particular, 1972, Norma Jean the Termite Queen by Sheila Ballantyne, really just was like, wow, they can sculpt in the garage and, kind of be out of that sort of conventional, traditional role. And then I was off. And then I knew I wanted to teach college, just really based, I think, on being inspired by my own college professors.
Okay, awesome. Great. And Terry, how about you? What got you started in teaching?
Well, I think the truth of the matter is I never wanted to be a teacher. I've written that in many places many times, but I never intended to be a teacher. As an undergraduate, I majored in English and in philosophy. And when you major in English and philosophy, it doesn't open up a lot of doors for you. So what I what I did is I went to graduate school because the University of Maine offered me a free ride. And so I went there to study English, and I started teaching there. And after I finished there, I was moving to Ithaca, New York to support my now wife as she was going to graduate school. And I thought, what am I going to do? How am I going to pay the bills? And I thought about all the jobs I had had up to that point. I was 24 years old. And I thought, this teaching that I did the past couple of years, it seems like something that I enjoyed, and it's kind of an ethical thing to do, and I like it. And so I found a teaching job in upstate New York for a few years, and the rest just sort of wrote itself. And I taught college for a while. I taught at a couple different kinds of high schools, and I came to MXCC in 2008, and it's been a really great place for me. I'm really lucky to have found this place and the people that I work with.
Wow.
And the students that I teach, too.
Yeah. Well, between the two of you both are very modest, but there's 35 years of teaching experience between the two of you.
No.
I'm that old?
That's so.
No.
And you both have a love of poetry as well, which I want to get to in a little while in a later segment. But I want to talk a bit about your classrooms and your teaching style and what you think you bring to the college in your classes. So when we come back from the break, I'll ask, but before we go to break, I just want to know, do you use bookmarks or do you dog ear your pages?
Go ahead.
I absolutely dog ear.
You do?
I dog ear.
I both.
You both.
If there's a handy bookmark, I'll use it, or a Post-it or something, but I definitely both.
Okay,
Yeah.
all right. Well, sounds good. All right, so we will be right back after this message. Welcome back to the Middlesex Moments radio show. I'm Julie Deneen, filling in for Dr. Wasesha as your host at Middlesex, and I'm talking with Christine Ruggiero and Terry McNulty, and I want to know a little bit about your classrooms and about your teaching style. So, Terry, why don't you start? What do you think your biggest strength is as a professor?
That's a great question. I really believe that where there's goodwill in a classroom, lots of things can be done. I think that I try to foster relationships, and I try to use a lot of humor in the classroom, and I also I try to be really approachable. Especially a lot of the students I work with, I don't want to have the sort of myth of the professor in the room where it's someone who knows a whole lot of stuff about a whole lot of stuff and that you can't really talk to.
Yeah, it's intimidating.
Yeah, I think it can be for a lot of students. And I mean, I know a lot of stuff about some things, but I'm perfectly, pretty blunt that I don't know a lot of stuff about a lot of things. Mm-hmm. And so I have content to deliver, and I hold my students to really high standards. But at the same time, I think that my classroom is fun and it's group oriented, and if you walk by, I think you'll hear a lot of noise. It's not the silence of like, the professor in the front of the room delivering the material. It's the noise of students working together as a community of students to learn stuff.
Yeah. Christine, how about you? I mean, does that ring true for your classroom as well? Is it noisy?
It is noisy. It's definitely noisy. I have to shut my door a lot. Yeah, and I also think that a great equalizer or a great equalizing assignment is really to have students write down something that they're really good at, that they know a lot about, that they could teach me. And so oftentimes, especially in, for instance, like a developmental class, I'll ask students, that'll be an assignment where they have to write a paragraph about what they do really well and something that they could teach me. Then we go around and we share that so that we all find that we can teach each other things and we can learn things from each other. And I think one of the greatest compliments I've ever received was that students have told me that they feel like they're in my living room when they're in the class. And I always really liked that because I thought it's a conversation. We're having dialogue. And I do agree with Terry that I think, I really love what I do, and I think that resonates in the classroom and hopefully rubs off a little bit.
It's like it's contagious.
That's what you hope.
Yeah.
And just having open dialogue. And I think being as much me as I possibly can in the classroom is also important. Yeah. I want to really be who I am in the classroom.
To kind of jump off on that contagiousness factor, how do you deal with a student who comes in and just, it's clear they hate English, they hate literature, they hate grammar, they hate anything to do with it? How do you try to infect them with your love of literature?
I think I try to be sort of authentic with the students. I just sort of try to be who I am, and I'm pretty clear. Like in an English 102 class, which is a literature and composition class, we read poetry, we read fiction, we read drama, and in my class, because poetry is kind of my thing, we read a lot more poetry than anything else. But I try to be clear up front. You don't have to like a single thing that we read. You're welcome to hate it all, as long as you are thinking hard about it and you're doing the work that you're here to do, which is to become a better reader of the material, even if you don't like it. God knows there's lots of stuff in life that we don't particularly enjoy, but that we have to do. And in the end, I find that many students who come in sort of professing a hatred of poetry turn it around, sometimes 180, sometimes just a little bit, to say, okay, maybe there is something to this. I also think that sometimes I work best with students who are oppositional defiant, because there's energy in that. Like if you love something or if you hate something, I can work with that. There's energy there. It's harder when someone is more apathetic or just doesn't care. That's harder to work with. But if you hate a poem that we're reading, that's awesome.
You can kind of capture that energy.
And that rubs off on other students. Yeah. That energy of, all right, now we can really talk about this.
Christine, have you ever had a student who has come in and just said, I am here just because I have to and I hate it?
Absolutely.
And what do you do?
Well, I just got out of class a little while ago and I had a student say, I cannot stand this writing. I hate writing essays. I hate English. And again, this is an early assignment, but just to kind of put all of our cards on the table, I think a lot of that comes from fear too, or past association, some kind of association with the discipline that has formed this opinion, and then it's something that stuck with them.
Right.
I mean, it's a skill just like anything else. I mean, I'm like, we could talk ourselves out of boiling water, right? No, I can't do that. Impossible. And then we come to maybe hate it because we think we can't do it, or we've been told that we're not very good at it, or we can't do it very well. So I do try to get at the fear a little bit, and I tell them, I mean, if I had to go back to school right now, I would need a tutor in math, and that's probably true. Yeah. And so we talk about things that we think that we don't like and why we don't like them, and I share my story, my math story with them. And I also try to have students go through, let's say, the table of contents for a reader that we're using in class. I say, okay, so I want you to go through this, and I want you to pick out things, some readings that you really like, that you think that you'd like to include. And so right now, our whole last segment of like Composition 101 is going to be based on the majority votes of essays. So they're reading 6 essays that they chose. Okay. And, just to get them invested a little bit in it. Yeah. Yes. And so getting at the fears isn't always easy, but it's a job.
Oh, now, I mean, I'm sure you have students who, on the flip side, love English and decide maybe they want to be an English major or lit major. What if you had a piece of advice for a student who was considering that field? What would it be? I mean, I know you made a joke about your job opportunities are limited, but realistically, what is out there for people who want to major in English and lit?
Well, I really think that you can do anything with an English major. I think that if you wanted to go into marketing or in business or in some aspect, you need good skills, and basic skills will get you a good job in almost any field. So if you can write pretty well and if you have good communication skills, I think that the degree only matters if it's really highly specialized. Okay. So that's the first thing. Secondly, I'd say, you can go to law school, you can become a historian if you want, you can, go to grad school, but I would say that it really depends. You can go into publishing, you can go into journalism, you can be a teacher, you can think about becoming a college teacher. So there are different areas to go into. I think it's a broad degree. I really do, and versatile.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And I joke before, because there's always that joke about the English major or the philosophy major. What are you going to do with that?
What are you going to do with that?
Yeah,
and, and the question itself is worthwhile. I remember there was a study released locally. I think it was of Middletown businesses, or at least Middlesex County businesses, a couple years ago, and they asked, what's the number one thing you want Middlesex Community College graduates to be able to do? And the number one thing was, we want them to be able to write well and also read well. And there's nothing better to do that than to practice as someone who studies literature or philosophy or any of those fields that really challenge you as a reader or a writer. But what I really think English does as a field is it gives you transferable skills. So if you can read a book really well, and if you can compose your thoughts on the page, then that's only one small step away from being able to speak really well and to speak really clearly, to be able to lead that meeting that you need to lead. So if you're working at an insurance company, at some point you're still going to have to go into a boardroom and lead a meeting, or you're going to have to communicate something to the people that you're leading.
And it's very true. I mean, so much of our world in a lot of ways is even more written than ever before. I mean, I know with texting it's all shorthand, but email, we are constantly communicating our thoughts in writing, so it's very good. What is the percentage of reading versus writing, like in your classroom? Do you spend more time reading and comprehending, or do you spend more time writing, composition?
I can say that because we're talking about what goes on in the classroom, we're not talking about outside. Yeah. But in the classroom, I think we're spending so much time on the reading. We do. It has to be. Probably 60-40 reading versus writing, but yeah, because we have to really delve into what it is that we're reading and try and break it down and analyze it from different points of view and angles, and give students the opportunity to express their critical thinking on whatever topic it is that we're talking about.
Right.
And I think that's really key to actually good composition, because if you've had that chance to kind of filter your thoughts and hear others and really try and form your opinion, then you'll be able to express that opinion a little bit more clearly.
And what do you think about kids who have trouble comprehending? I remember in college my professors would give me 500 pages in a week. Do you have any advice for students who are slow readers or who have a hard time retaining information as they're reading?
I think the students are trained, especially today in the era that we live in of standardized testing. Students are trained to go into a classroom, get the answers, and give the answers. Mm-hmm. And what I hope my students leave the classroom with are questions and not answers. Questions lead to wonder. Questions lead to things to write about. So if you're struggling with a reading load, or if you're struggling with the material that you're reading, you should be asking questions. You should be keeping note of the questions you have, keeping note of the confusions that you have, because those questions are ultimately going to be more valuable to you in a literature class than the answers are. You can't write a paper unless you have a question to answer first.
Oh, that's excellent advice. Well, we're gonna go to break in a minute. When we come back, I'm gonna ask you a few quirky questions about what you think about Kindles versus hardcover books, because I know English lovers, book lovers tend to have opinions about that. But as we go to break, just quickly, bookstore or library, which is better?
Ooh, library. There are no
Library.
more. Where are bookstores?
Okay.
There are no more bookstores.
What do you think?
No,
I think library too, but that's
Okay.
that's a hard one. Depends on the
it
bookstore.
is. It really does depend on the bookstore.
Okay.
I know a couple of good gems. So.
We'll be right back after this message. Welcome back to the Middlesex Moments radio show. I'm Julie Deneen, filling in for Dr. Wasesha as your host at Middlesex Community College. Today we're talking with Christine Ruggiero and Terry McNulty, two of our English professors in our first of the Meet the Professors series. And before the break, I said I had a bunch of questions for them that were kind of quirky. But I just want to start. The digital age, Kindles, Nooks, versus the old school book. English literature lovers seem to have strong opinions about this. What do you think?
I love my books. Don't ever take my books away. No, I mean that in all truth. I mean, I have an iPhone and I'll use my iPhone. My husband has an iPad. I'll use it. I'll certainly read things, but nothing, absolutely nothing makes me feel like home. I mean, other than my son and my husband, of course, but then my books. My rooms need to be full of books. I carry a couple of my favorite books with me in my book bag. I need my books. I love the smell of books. I love the feel of a book. It just brings such warmth and happiness. Do you see?
Yeah.
I mean, to
You're
me,
all bright and cheery
it does.
talking
Well,
about it.
I heard somebody once say, I don't want any books in my house. No books. Their kids have Kindles. They have a
Wow.
Kindle. Right. And I try to be really open-minded, and I say, okay, I do get it. I do. They've got the cool lighting now. They've got that all set, right?
Yep.
Whereas before that was a problem. It's not a problem, but
It's just
I
something
can't do
about a
it.
book.
Yeah.
Terry, do you agree?
I do, and I love books, and I collect books, and I have so many more books than I could probably ever read, and I just like having books around. I like the smell of books. I like the feel of books. I like being able to write in the margins of a book. I have an e-reader, but all the research demonstrates that comprehension is different on screen than it is on page, and whether that has to do with resolution or modality, I'm not sure. But an e-reader, I tend to skim, and I tend to scroll, and I tend to skip over. So I do a lot of like breezy reading on an e-reader. So magazines I'll read there. Light reading, like I read a lot of sci-fi, I'll read that on an e-reader. But if it's serious stuff, like if I've got to read something where I need to fight with it and wrestle with it and understand it, I need paper.
You need paper.
Yeah.
That's interesting. I feel that way when I'm printing things out to read and review. It's much easier to review on paper than it is on a screen. So that's an interesting thought. If you could dream up a course that isn't here at Middlesex yet, that you want to teach, that you would never grow tired of teaching, what kind of course would that be?
It would be a course in Ruth Stone.
That did not take you long
Ruth-
to answer.
Ruth Stone is probably my favorite poet, and she died several years ago, and I think that she's been an underrepresented poet in modern poetry, and really not written on as much, but brilliant, absolutely brilliant. She writes on from feminism to fauna to,
Yeah.
really interesting poet. I would.
So a whole course on just this one
On
poet.
Ruth Stone,
Okay.
absolutely. The house is made of stone, and that would be the title. And I didn't come up with that. I did not come up with that. That was the title of an essay that was written on Ruth Stone. And I thought that would be good. That's part of the title. I could probably use part of the title for a title for a course.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I'll have to look her up now. I've never heard of her.
I would love to teach a course on language poetry, really avant-garde poetry, say 1970 to present, as well as its roots in, say, the 20 to 30 preceding years. The language poets were these poets, late 60s through the 70s, really like taken off in the early 80s, who put language before meaning. So you get a lot of poems that make absolutely no sense, that have these beautiful rhythms and these beautiful sounds, and it's as much about music and confusion as it is about intended meaning. And it really breaks how you would traditionally read a poem, and it breaks this idea of author as an intentional force. It's like a splat. It's like a Jackson Pollock painting or a splatter painting on in the written way, and it's very difficult stuff to teach, and it's very difficult stuff to read, and I love it so much. But I also love how in the 90s and today, that stuff is sort of spliced with other stuff that's very easy to communicate with, like Frank O'Hara, the poems of Frank O'Hara, and what's emerging out of that. So that's where I live.
Well, this is really funny because I know that you both love poetry, and I have to just come clean and say that I would be a student who'd say, I hate poetry. Why would you put such flowery language when you can just say what you mean and mean what you say? And what would you say to someone like me who just can't wrap their head around why this is so important?
Say what you mean and mean what you say. But I would say, I think in the words of Robert Creeley, words say more than what words say. By which I mean that we use language in very pedestrian ways every day, and we use it for very simple communicative purposes. But language has these other roles that it can play in our lives, and it can force us to confront ideas and realities in ways that we never anticipated. What poetry does for me, whether it's a poem that makes perfect sense, a poem I have to fight with, or a poem that makes no sense, is it makes the floor fall out from under me. Mm-hmm. And a good poem forces me to see the world and myself in a way that I never considered before. Good poems change my day and my life.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
So what I would say to that, I have maybe two analogies. One is that one of my friends had a baby last year, and she said to me, why didn't you ever tell me how amazing and life-changing this is? And I said, I did. I did. I said how great it is to have a baby. It's like trying to explain to somebody how amazing it is to have a baby. You need to feel the baby. You need to smell the baby. Mm-hmm. You need to hold the baby and study it and watch it. That's what an image is. That's the image. And it speaks 1,000 words. So sometimes there is no saying what you mean and meaning what you say, because it doesn't actually do justice to what it is, right, to what it is that you're trying. And then I forgot my second one. I had another metaphor, but I forgot it. Oh. But the baby one, I think, I do think that makes a difference. It's, it's too beautiful to just say, oh, you're going to love being a mom, Do
you think, what is your students who don't like poetry, do you make them write it? Do you make them try to write it, or is it more just about reading it and understanding it?
Well, really, I think for me, it depends on what kind of class it is. I definitely try to choose poems that are accessible. There's a famous poet, Billy Collins. He used to be U.S. Poet Laureate, who says, you have to open the door for me. If you're not going to open the door for me, I am not going to beat it down. So, I definitely try to give students poems that are just open doors, walk right in, and, and fun and playful as well, so that they can connect with the poetry. And then maybe I'll introduce something that's a little bit, has a little, a few more layers or textual analysis to it. Okay. But that's sort of my approach, and it really depends. So I want them to appreciate it, but I definitely don't think that they need to have to write it in order to appreciate the poetry. But maybe memorize a poem, or pick one that they really like, because that's fun. That can be a fun assignment.
Yeah.
I think it really does depend on the class. Like in an English 102, a literature and composition class, we read lots of poems, but we're writing very academic papers about those poems. We're writing these thesis-driven essays. And I'm teaching an American Lit 2 class right now, which covers from like the Civil War to the present. And they're writing very academic papers about the poems that they read and the short stories that they read. And if they want to write something, I'm happy to sit down with them and look at what they're writing, if they're writing a poem or whatever, or a series of poems. But that's not the focus of the class. A creative writing class, on the other hand,
would be
a third of the class is writing poems, so you're going to have to do it. And plenty of students don't like doing it, but if you want to pass the class, that's part of what you got to do. That's how it goes.
What's one book or poem, since we're on that topic, but one book that every human being on planet Earth should read before they die?
I know what he's going to say.
Okay.
Well, I think I know what he's going to say.
It's so hard to just give you one. It is.
I know, but I'm asking for one.
So, I can't do it. So, To the Lighthouse is a book that, Virginia Woolf, To the Lighthouse is a book that I just come back to repeatedly because of the way that it fractures narrative and the way that the language is just so breathtaking. Like, that book just blows my mind. But in terms of books that shifted the ground on which I live and changed the way I see the world, Wallace Stevens' collected poems, Louis Zukowski's collected poems and his collected fiction have been really important to me. And I mean, I can't single out one book, but you know, the philosophy of Jacques Derrida and deconstructionism itself is so important to me. And so many poets from the 90s, people like Lisa Robertson and Jennifer Moxley and Ben Friedlander just blow my mind. You know? So
you gave me more than one,
did.
but
Yes.
I will give you a free pass. How about you?
Well, the reason why I was saying I know that he was going to say is because we talk about Virginia Woolf, because one of my favorite books is Mrs. Dalloway, which is also by Woolf. And it shook me really for a similar reason, I think, that To the Lighthouse moved Terry so much, but because it breaks narrative, but what it does, it plays with narrative as much as it plays with voice and perspective and point of view, as well as, I think, gender and sexuality.
Wow.
And those were things that I was very much interested for a long time. So I also think like Betty Friedan is really important. And one of my favorite poetry books is Who is the Widow's Muse by Ruth Stone. That was really, changing for me. And Sheila Valentine's. I'm going back to Norma Jean, the Termite Queen.
Both of you are very disobedient. Unfortunately,
I know.
we have to end. So thank you, Terry and Christine, both for joining me. I just want to sign off with one last question. You prefer long chapters or short chapters when you're reading a book?
depends on the book.
Doesn't matter.
Long chapters.
It doesn't matter to me. No,
Okay.
I actually would never even have thought of that.
All right, if you want to learn more about Middlesex Community College, you can find us on the internet at mxcc.edu. Thank you for joining us today. I'm Julie, wishing you all a good day.